I'm Nicola Courtwright. I teach art history here. I'm also chair of European Studies, and I see some European Studies faces out here. This lecture of Jürgen Müller, who is a professor at the Technische Universität in Dresden of early modern art history, my field, is sponsored by the Lamont Funds of the college, by the European Studies Department, by Film and Media Studies, and by Art and History of Art Department. Now I have to tell you, and German, thank you, and German, thank you. They'll be coming to you for the funds, yes. So we're very grateful to have Jürgen here, a friend that I made only last year, in Dresden actually, because I thought of him when I knew his scholarship as a very deep scholar of Renaissance and Baroque art. When you look at his CV, he got a summa cum laude when he did his dissertation at Bochum. He did his Habilitationsschrift in Kassel, also in art history. He wrote books. This is what I know him for. The Paradox als Bildform. That is the idea of paradox in the work of Bruegel. Really interesting stuff. He also wrote about the Socratic artist with Rembrandt. He's just written a big exhibition catalog on Peter Bruegel. So that's what I thought of Jürgen until we met. And then I began to realize this man had a serious other life, a very unusual other life for art historians like me. I thought he was like me. I was completely wrong. He actually was a guest professor at the Sorbonne in Paris, where he, however, taught cinema and the audiovisual stuff. So while he was getting very fancy fellowships in early modern art, he was the USS, he was at the Scuola Normale in Pisa, he had a stipend in Amsterdam, he was at the Biblioteca Hertziana in Rome, all the places I have been or would like to be. He's also doing this work on cinema. And then after he started to teach at the Sorbonne, he started to publish, I think, his first works in cinema in 2001, films of the 90s. Then in 2002, films of the 80s. Then films of the 70s in 2003. In 2004, films of the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, the 30s. Then finally, films of the 20s. Then he went back to the films of the 2000s just 4 years ago. So he's catching up. If that were not enough, he's written on film noir. He writes in journals and popular newspapers, does film criticism. And recently, and this will please our favorite professor, Emily Hasty, he just wrote a book published this year on the best TV shows. And he's not talking about German TV shows, he's talking about American TV shows in this book. So, he has been asked to contribute a catalog entry to the exhibition that's happening at the Neue Galerie in New York is it on Metropolis, the exhibition? And so as a consequence, with no further more ado, let me introduce Jürgen Müller, who's going to talk to us about Babylon, Babelsberg, Fritz Lang's Metropolis, reinterpreted. Thanks for coming, Jürgen.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola, for this kind introduction. And so, who the hell is Babelsberg? It's the German Metropolis. It's the German Hollywood. It's a place near Berlin where the UFA, the film production firm of the Weimarer period, produced all the movies which were in that time very, very famous. So anyone picking up Thea von Habou's novel Metropolis today will be amazed by the pathos the author expressed in it. Without a doubt, the author had a knack for performance. I place this book in your hands, Fritz, is the unctuous dedication of her novel to her husband Fritz Lang. In 1926, the text was published in an abridged version in a serial novel by the Frankfurt weekly paper Das Illustrierte Blatt. Then the book was published by August Scherl in Berlin a year before the legendary film presented. In addition to the dedication to her husband, there is another prelude in which the author offers the reader her own assessment of the work. This book is not of today or of the future. It tells of no place, it serves no cause, party or class. It has a moral which grows on the pillar of understanding. The mediator between brain and muscle must be the heart. End of quotation. What is the riddle von Habu wants to offer her reader here? First, she tells us what the book isn't and rejects any attempt to exploit or instrumentalize her text, only to end with the sentimental assertion about the heart. The film Metropolis is very famous. It depicts a distant future in which the working class has been deprived of all rights and slaves away in subterranean production plants in order to enable an aristocratic class to live a comfortable life. Only the love affair between Maria, a young woman, and Freda, the son of Fredersen, the ruler of Metropolis, gets things moving. There is an uprising in which the evil inventor Rotwang wants to take vengeance in Fredersen for having taken away his great love long ago. Initially, Fredersen believes he is allied with Rotwang, but in reality the latter is pursuing his own ends. He has created an artificial human being with which he hopes to resurrect his former love. Because the workers are dissatisfied, Fredersen asks Rotwang to design the robot to resemble the young woman from the masses. His intention is to incite from them to give him a pretext to respond violently. The plan fails. In the end, the insane inventor is overcome by the young Freda, who throws him off the roof of the cathedral. A new era begins for Metropolis. The subterranean world of the workers is destroyed, so that there is no basis any longer for the exploitative system. A better future can begin in which the world is no longer divided into top and bottom. The social order in Metropolis is seemingly strangely pre-modern. The ruling class stands face to face with the workers, with no bourgeois that could mediate the rise and fall. Jo Fredersen, the ruler above it all. Here, this is the end of the movie. And here you see Fredersen. The image in his company headquarters present him to be a powerful industry tycoon. As the plot progresses, he is the character who has to change the most in order for a new order to prevail. In Metropolis, the old stand against the young, which initially brings the mind the conflict of fathers and sons. In opposition this opposition is clearest, however, in the narrative strand of the final that concerns the rescuing of the workers' children. They symbolize the future of the whole population. The sequence of their rescue is given unusually extensive coverage in the film. In shot after shot, the children run up the steps out of their subterranean neighborhood to escape the flood. In both the novel and the film, the cryptic use of Christian symbols and motives is striking. The members of the groups of workers led by Maria, who assemble in hidden subterranean locations, are called Gothics. This established a connection to the old venerable cathedral, which is consciously contrasted with the high-rises of the modern world in Metropolis. With its religiously untinged critique of capitalism, we may find the story naive, but the crucial thing about the construction of the plot is that the injustice cannot be recognized by the people living above ground. These idlers do not notice that their carefree existence is due to the work of others. With reference to the novel, Wolfgang Braungart has even spoken of a Catholicizing utopia, which could be about a renewal of the Catholic order. This thesis deserves discussion insofar as it raises the question of whether the novel and the film and the ethics advocated in both are to be understood as national or transnational. At the end of the film, when the residents of Metropolis are standing in front of the of the cathedral, has the class society been overcome? Are the people agreeing on a new Christian ethics that bridges differences? Or is the new order an old one in the sense of the pre-modern? Are state and religion united again from now on? If so, the good news of the film goes back to a time before the Enlightenment. If we want to reflect on the film in a fresh way, we have to be on guard against the laudatory rhetoric of the masterpiece and of world cultural heritage. Instead, it is necessary to explain how such a well-versed screenwriter and an experienced director could have ignored the audience so completely. Fritz Lang produced UFA's most expensive film at 5 million Reichsmark. It eclipsed everything that had come before it. Certainly, the film represents an enormous effort, but at the same time it was a flop in German cinemas. The director's goal was to be on a par with such innovative and ambitious films as Kabiria, Birth of a Nation, Napoleon, and Battleship Potemkin. In Metropolis, Lang was attempting nothing less than creating a national film icon, building a German cathedral of film, so to speak, an ambition that the film does not, however, live up to any point. Metropolis has been interpreted either politically or mythically in the sense of a fairy tale. It began with Siegfried Krakauer's book From Caligari to Hitler, which accused the film of a proto-fascist tendency because of its penchant for crowd scenes. In Tom Gunning's biography of Lang, the psychoanalytical depth structure of the film is emphasized in the spirit of an Oedipal drama. Thomas Elsässer also argued that the narrative had an ahistorical structure. He devoted a monograph to the film that, for long stretches, comes across as a research report with commentary. Elsässer opts for a deconstructive reading in which all interpretation based on intention and attributing meaning are played out against one another in order to reveal the film's ability to be more intelligent than its interpreters. And so on. So I would say what I try to give you now is a political reading of the movie, which was very hard to understand because it was 2 hours and 30 minutes, and because it was such a flop, they took off 40 minutes of the film, and from then on it was difficult to understand. So, but in 2010, in Buenos Aires, they found a rest of this movie and they edited it, and now we have nearly a complete version of 2.5 hours of this movie. And so my interpretation, if you want, so has a starting point the whole movie, and I'm going to speak about pictures which haven't been interpreted before. So if we begin with the discussion of the quality of the novel, it has to be said that Thea von Habu was the most popular screenwriter and writer for UFA in that period. She did a lot of movies, and she was able to construct very popular stories. So I tried to find autographs because there are photographies of the apartment of Fritz Lang and Thea von Habu, and they had a lot of books. So the question is, what did they read? It was impossible for me to reconstruct, but there is one author they were both engaged in, and this is Karl May, which is a very popular German author which lived in Radebeul, which is a place in Dresden. So, and we have the guest book of May, and Thea von Habu and Fritz Lang was there, and they were really big fans of Karl May, which in Germany is today or nowadays not so popular, but in former times it was the cult author for all young boys, and he wrote Indian stories. But what is important is also we have a text by Thea von Habu where she says that Winnetou, which is a very famous character in Karl May, was her first love. So this is the only thing we know for sure that they are both Fritz Lang and Thea von Abu engaged in German popular culture. So the book is important because Thea von Abu studied it very early. She spent a lot of time to create it. And what you all know of this movie is that the architectural setting is very good. So if Fritz Lang later on spoke on the movie, he was very proud of all these scenes. And there were three very important architects of this time, Filmarchitekten, what means they were not really architects, but they did design. So they know how to stage things to present them in the movie. And Erich Kettelhut is probably the most famous of the persons Fritz Lang worked with. So you will see here, this is a drawing by Erich Kettelhut, and you see it's the idea of the city during the night, and they used for all their scenes popular models. Die Welt in 1000 Jahren, which was a very popular book at the beginning of the 20th century in Germany, but also American models have been used. And you see, this is very important, this way of presenting a city of the future. And what we had not, of course, in Germany, as you had here in the States, are skyscrapers. So there were a huge discussion in Germany if there could be something like ein deutsches Hochhaus. Yeah? And this has been taken. And what I want to show you now is, this is fantastic. So you have the impression that your eye is on a very high level and that there is nobody, and the question is that you can't see, you only have traffic in this city of the future. And of course, the architecture in Metropolis is, if you want, the counterpart of this medieval cathedral. I would say one can take the movie, of course, as a sort of symptom of modernism, but I think that the film has intentionally be against modernism. All the things we see in Metropolis are not in a way something to promote Ludwig Mies van der Rohe or modern architects, but quite the contrary, to take this as a sort of future that Thea von Abu and Fritz Lang didn't want it. So this becomes clear so he and Pommer, who was the producer of the movie, made a trip to New York. And Fritz Lang later on always said that this was an important point of departure for them to see such a modern city. But if you look at Metropolis, you see that this labyrinthian quality you have in Piranesi and such things is important for Metropolis. And the first Hochhaus in Metropolis is the Tower of Babel. And here, of course, we have a social dimension insofar as it's difficult to construct such a large building, and you have to have also an organization to build this up. And okay, so this is the beginning. This is one of the posters to promote the movie. So, what all these pictures have in common, and what I tried to show you, is that they were playing in the movie with the question of aesthetic boundary. Not just today, but already in 1927, Metropolis had a difficult time reaching a cinema audience. From the outset, people objected to its false pathos. That applies not only to the plot, but also to the arc of tension. When the false Maria has to be burned at the stake at the end of the film, or when the children are saved from the floodwaters and the people from the workers' world run up or down the steps in powerful crowd shots, the viewer is left unmoved. Yeah? But what they tried is really to reach the viewer. They tried to integrate viewers artfully into the film by addressing them with the camera directly and subjectively. Lang's diverse use of the stylistic means of breaking down the aesthetic boundaries demonstrates that it was particularly relevant to him. A few examples, as we have seen, can be identified and distinguished. The viewer not only adopts the role of Freda's eavesdropping on the sermon of the monk Desertus, during which he holds up a Bible with a woodcut of the Whore of Babylon, but they are also blinded with Rotwang's flashlight along with Maria, get into a wild duel with an admirer of the mechanical Maria, are called to order by the whistling of the workers' leader Groth, and gaze in parallel with the excited audience in the Yoshiwara. As a rule, the subjective camera goes hand in hand with a role assignment that enables us to experience a certain scene directly with the eyes of the person involved. Yeah. This play with the aesthetic boundary is surely most impressive in the sequences dedicated to saving the children. When the workers, in a rage, as predicted and provoked by Jo Fredersen, storm and destroy the heart machine, their homes are flooded. Along with the children, we have been forgotten in them. As Maria and Freda try to save these left behind with dramatic actions, the viewer is addressed in a way that deserves closer analysis. When Maria sounds the large alarm bell on the central square to summon help, the rescue action begins. As she uses the lever to set the bell's clapper in motion, there is a cut, and it looks as if the viewer is in the bell's position, so that the clapper moves towards us and strikes the movie screen from inside. I show So, this does not serve to assign a role in the sense of a subjective camera, but rather makes the auditorium and the viewers sitting there the theme. This changes again a short time later when the children, hoping to be saved from the floodwaters, extend their hands toward Maria and Freda to seek help. The camera then shows the children from a top of view, thus putting the viewer in the role of the rescuing couple. But for that moment, when the clapper strikes the movie screen, the fiction is abolished. The audience is aware of its presence. Finally, you awaken, and not that is about your future. The images seem to want to say. It speaks for itself that this shot is repeated 7 times over the course of the rescue. Why does Lang so excessively use this stylistic technique of evoking the present movement? Something similar is achieved in the final, playing with the viewer's anxiety about the helpless children. It is not just about the now, but also about the future of the entire people. It is interesting in this context that to note that the modification was made to the Ufer Pavilion am Nollendorfplatz, which is destroyed during the war. It was the only cinema where Metropolis was shown after the premiere, and it was on the program until May 13. The alarm bell from the film's final was placed over the entrance so that fiction and reality were already associated for the viewer. when I subject Metropolis to an iconographic analysis here, I assume that there can be different ways of referring to works of the visual arts in film. Yeah. So you can, and what is probably true for this period in general, German cinemas in the 20s tried to combine, if you want, technical progress and culture, in the sense that a lot of famous directors in this period tried to use classical images, and to use classical, if you want, topics like Die Nibelung. And I show you one image just from the beginning of the movie. And for an art historian, you see that there is a sort of quotation from Bosch and the Garden of Earthly Delights. So Lang was, if you want, so this is the way I see it. Thea von Abu did the script, but Lang was the one who did the translation into images. He was a very good painter. He was a very good sculptor. His father was an architect, so he had a, I would say, classical education concerning images. And I go through the movie now and I show you what you may find if you take a closer look at the images. Here you have the siren, the motif here from Bosch. But just an image like that, Maria is for the first time in the upper world of the high class, and you take this as a Schutzmantel Madonna, we call that, yeah. Or take the use of the Tower of Babel from Vienna, yeah, and from Rotterdam, or for instance, take these architects reflecting the Tower of Babel, and look the person on the left side, which is of course a quotation from Rodin, and he lived for a certain while in Paris, Fritz Lang. Or take, I showed you in the clip, this motif of the death coming out of the picture, and you see Berglin's Pest, which is, I don't remember, I think in Zurich. So, for instance, but also on a deeper level, this is the dance of the False Maria, and you see this place she's coming out, and here you see the Straßburger Münster. Yeah, so they are playing with medieval, very German works of art. Yeah, Strasbourg is the place Goethe, the novelist, wrote about on German art. Or look at this here, the Hur Babylon coming out, and you see such a medieval. Or such a quotation. Here is the heart machine, where all the energy for Metropolis is produced. And on the right side, you have the Newton cenotaph by the French architect Boulez. And you see this all the time. They are playing with such quotations. But even, this is Fredersen, the tycoon, the industrial tycoon. And the students know who this man is. It's a very famous American. Who is this? You have an idea? So this is Ford, the very important automobile producer, which was very famous in Germany at that period. Everybody knew how he looked like. So if you want, even to have chosen an actor which looks a little bit like this person, of course, was an iconographical decision. Okay, so we have this first level. You can say now, well, okay, this is educated, but is it really political? So this is a possibility to show off a little bit what you learned at school and what kind of education you had. But what's, of course, more interesting is the question in how far this gets a political story and how we come to see that. So Fritz Lang all the time took himself as a painter. If he speaks, he wrote some short text about his own work, he always sees himself in a pictorial tradition. This is clear, and also after we have seen all these pictures. So now the question is, how do we come to see a political element in this movie? And this is not too simple, because we have to reconstruct a little bit the political situation. You can imagine this is 27, the movie. This was the time after the First World War, and it was very difficult in Germany to think what German future should be, because the people didn't have any experience with democracy and were not very happy about this moment. So there are interesting references, and doubtless they are characteristic of the film's aesthetic ambitions. But what about the level of political meaning? Siegfried Kracauer early on made the film insistence on crowd scenes. The point of departure for his reflections and determined that its content was proto-fascist. However, Krakauer's thesis with regard to Metropolis did not lead to other specific observations, but instead to arguments about a zeitgeist that determined everything. That is problematic, in that the zeitgeist can famously adopt any form. It is always already there, and it's responsible for everything. In contrast to Krakauer, I would like to retain the paradigm of subjective intentionality. Thea von Abu's novel and her screenplay, but also the film, have an intended statement, regardless of how many readers or viewers understand it or not. This message is not contraband, as Krakauer called it, that consciously influenced the making of the film. Rather, it corresponds to a world view that is still recognizable today. After all the comparisons between images in the film and works of fine art, it's reasonable to observe that Lang's film placed great demands on education as a way of distinguishing itself from American productions. But what is the real message of Metropolis? The key image in the whole form is the scene of the monk's Desertus sermon, that is to say, in a sequence that could only be rediscovered in the latest reconstruction. So this is an image former interpretations didn't have. During his church service with a young Freda attends, Desertus refers to the whore of Babylon in his sermon and holds up a woodcut to the people in the church. Her image is seen in an illustrated Bible, and soon thereafter it will recur in a dream that seems to comment on the real events around the false Maria. It should be emphasized, in keeping with it being a key image, that the sequence with the monk Desertus on the pulpit is shown twice in the film. When the monk presents the woodcut, it is especially emphasized. Once again, fiction and reality meet here, since the viewer in the cinema is equated with the visitors in the mass at this moment. The actual viewer is once again integrated into the narrative. This message about the whore of Babylon is for the viewer. The monk's stance also alludes to an apocalyptic context. For the figure of Desertus getting worked up, Lang cites none other than the figure of Christ from Michelangelo's Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel. To take another brief look at the woodcut to hold up, it shows the whore on the scarlet animal and holding a golden cup in her hand. Lang may have borrowed this motif from Dürer's Apocalypse. In doing so, he used the motif quite literally, but rotated it 45 degrees towards the viewer. Watching the film, we now find ourselves where the man succumbed to the whore, as described in the book of Revelation in the Bible. The woodcut is thus a key image because it becomes the means of interpretation, so to speak. For once one has recognized the key, other scenes can be connected. For example, the death by fire of the false Maria of the false Maria refers to the story of the apocalypse in the Bible as depicted, for example, in a woodcut by Matthias Gerung. Finally, Freda's fight with Rotwang, in which the inventor falls from the roof of the cathedral, is reminiscent of the archangel Michael's struggle with Satan, whose fall into hell introduced the millennium. Once again, there is a reference to Dürer's woodcut of the Apocalypse, which shows the struggle with the monster in the foreground, and the heavenly Jerusalem is already visible in the background on the left, watched over by an angel, and its gate takes the form of a cathedral facade. In the final scene, when the workers stream to the entrance of the cathedral, one is also reminded of the iconography of medieval altar pieces. One thinks of humanity saved and permitted to enter the heavenly Jerusalem after the last judgment. It is all the more astonishing that this context of apocalyptic images has been acknowledged in the interpretation of the film, especially given that the contrast of the true and false Maria, which is so important to the narrative, has its point and of departure in the biblical opposition of the women of the Apocalypse and the whore of Babylon. And you see here Johannes auf Patmos. These apocalyptical biblical allusions together permit a view of Metropolis as a decadent den of iniquity doomed to fall. If we bring all these discoveries together, the film Metropolis often offers nothing less than the prospect of the beginning of the 1,000-year reign of the millennium. As we know, the National Socialist idea of the 1,000-year Reich is of biblical origin and can be traced back to the book of Revelation. The final reign is preceded by a struggle between good and evil, and the film alludes to its stages in many ways. First, it does so by using motives from the Apocalypse, and second, by repeating the narrative structure of the biblical story. To bring about the final reign, it is, however, necessary to get rid of Satan, Rotwang, and the false Maria, to remove everything foreign from the body of the people. Various interpreters have emphasized that the name Rotwang is Jewish in origin and also referred to the golem motive of the artificial human and the presentation of the inventor Rotwang as a magician. Anton Kees made the figure of the Jew Rotwang and the femme fatale Maria out to be scapegoats who are excluded from the harmonious ending. So I would say there are even racial motives in the movie which haven't been taken, but I would say that this scene in Yoshiwara, the nightclub of Metropolis, is in a way against America. It's a sort of racial melting pot in this fantasy, and here you have a lot of pictures. Prostitutes are shown and so on. And normally in the film, only European persons are shown, but in Yoshiwara, this is quite different. But who may, in a way, give this idea to all these ideas of Thea von Abo? And I think I go through, there is a book which has inspired Thea von Abo, and this book is by a man, Müller van den Broek, an intellectual, a conservative intellectual, who did this book in 1923, so much earlier than the National Socialists get the power. But this book influenced very much Goebbels' ideas of the Reich, and he read it all the time. So we have the journal of Goebbels, where he read that he's very interested in Müller van den Broek, and this book, in a way, is well written. So he was the first editor of the whole Dostoevsky in German. He translated from French into German. He was a real intellectual, and he had his own journal. So he was quite an interesting man. He met Hitler, and he was against him. But however, this theory of National Socialism took from everything a little bit. So this is not very, if you want, something new, but they stole this. And in this book, the question is, what I told you already, what is the position of Germany in the modern period? And in a way, he rejected communism, he rejected democracy, he rejected capitalism, and so on, had this idea to combine socialist and nationalist ideas in this book. And so it was very important for Goebbels, who used it in a lot of ways. So this is my idea, that I think that these apocalyptic images from the Tausendjähriges Reich are influenced by Müller van den Broek's book. I haven't found things on Thea von Abu which can really prove that, so I have to admit this. I looked in every kinemathek in Germany for autographs of Thea von Abu, and I find a lot of postcards, but very banal things. So she never said, I've read this or I've done something else. She corresponds a lot with her family, but this is the only thing I found. So if we return once again, I want to show you this text once again. If we return once again to the aphorism of the novel and the film, the heart as mediator between brain and hand, we can draw parallels between Thea von Abu's concern and that of Müller van den Broek, for it is striking how much the author takes her lead from the preface to the Das Dritte Reich, when she claims a standpoint beyond classes, trends and parties. Müller van den Broek had already considered the overcoming of parties to be a prerequisite for the future empire in which the people would be united. I quote, "Instead of government by party, we offer the ideal of the Third Empire. It is an all-German conception and a great one. It arose when our first empire fell. It was earthly quickened by the thought of a millennium, but its underlying thought has always been a future which should be not the end of all things, but the dawn of a German age in which the German people would be the first time fulfill their destiny on earth." End of quotation, Müller van den Broek. The metaphors of the hands as a symbol of the proletariat, or that of the ruler as human intermediary, are also prefigured in the conservative authors. Moreover, one must also mention the primacy of blood, which precedes all state forms of organization, in Müller van den Broek as well. Finally, one is also reminded of von Abu's strange formulation that her novel is about an event that grows on the pillar of understanding. It has long since been known that Thea von Abu became a member of the National Socialist Party of Germany in 1940, relatively late. But she was in contact with Goebbels much earlier. And there are a lot of writings of Goebbels in the journal where he said, I met Thea von Abu, intelligent woman, we prepare a new script for this or that film. So she was very close, and she wrote to friends who left Germany in that period, why do you go? We tried to establish something new, you have to come back, we want to have a new Germany, and now you are leaving, and so on. So she was very enthusiastic about the new government. But even her text from the beginning of the previous century reflect her politically nationalist attitudes all the time. She has been such a person. We are indebted to Karin Bruns, so this is well known and nothing new, for a solid assessment of von Abu's ideas, which need not to be discussed at length here. Yet a real notion of how the film Metropolis could be seen from a political perspective is illustrated by a diary entry by Joseph Goebbels on March 25, 1927. So this is interesting. Nobody has seen that Goebbels has written few sentences on Metropolis. So how has Goebbels perceived the movie? So this is what I'm going to tell you now. Who saw the film still in its unabridged version 2 months after the Uferpalast am Zoo in Berlin. So I quote, with the Schweizers at the cinema. Schweitzer was a very famous artist who drew for the Stürmer and for National Socialistic reviews and so on. So, with the Schweizers at the cinema, Metropolis, great directing, subject, insipid, sentimental going-ons around National Socialist ideas, end of quotation. This remark about Metropolis might seem astonishing since it attributes a clear political message to the film classic. And that is unfamiliar to us from the secondary literature. But it cannot be said of Goebbels that he had only a vague notion of National Socialism. Exactly what Goebbels meant when he alleged that the film took up National Socialist lines of thought has been sufficiently demonstrated in our view. It begins with the final apocalyptic struggle, includes the pseudo-socialism at the end of the film, and continues with the suggestion of a Volksgemeinschaft, which naturally presumes the exclusion of the inventor Rotwang. Evil has been overcome. The workers and the ruling elite have been reconciled. The final image is revealing the masses. Here you see Goebbels, and you have an idea of how his diary looks like. It's not, of course, the part I read to you, but he wrote a lot of things in this diary, which has, I don't know, 25 volumes like that.
Jürgen, you should tell some of the people who aren't familiar who Goebbels is in relation to the...
Yeah, he was the, what we call Reichspropagandaminister. So he was, if you want, the person who who was responsible for movies, for writings, the image of the National Socialist Party and the Reich to foreigners. So he was the one who had everything in his hands, and he was a doctor of, der war Germanist. So he did a Doktorarbeit, he did a PhD, clever. He came from a very Catholic background. He was educated in a Jesuit school, and so he was very educated. He knew a lot of movies, so these diaries, he saw everything Disney, he was familiar with Russian movies and so on. So he was a politician, which was one of the few intellectuals in this National Socialistic context. Yeah, very important, but he was the whole time very close to Hitler, and he had no, if you want, special, but he was in a way also the modernist in this context. So here's the end of my paper. The workers and the ruling elite has been reconciled. The final image is revealing the masses are marching in step in front of the imposing church building. We have seen that many times. The handprint marks the beginning of a new era. The precise conditions of such a future, however, remains completely in the dark. If in the end the inequality between rich and poor, above and below, has been eliminated, and the people of Metropolis are standing in front of the cathedral, it is not a victory of the Christian practice of religion. Rather, the Volksgemeinschaft of the residents of Metropolis has come to terms with itself. It and the cathedral are one. The 1,000-year Reich can begin in Metropolis. Thank you.
I think Jürgen is willing to answer any questions if you have them. So please.
Please.
This was very interesting, and I very much liked your interpretation of the film. What I've come across so far is that Thea von Habu was a communist. No?
No. Not
She
at
was
all.
very leftist. And
Yeah, I
she had
would-
to cut some of the film because Fritz Lang was not of her opinions.
Yeah. No, so I wouldn't say that she was a communist at any time. So perhaps this enthusiasm of combining nationalist and socialist ideas, I wouldn't know that. So everything I read from Thea von der Busch, she had always a very, very bourgeois life. Yeah. So there were no things concerning communism or things like that. So I haven't found that. So, but I would say that she was responsible for these ideas. It was not Fritz Lang. So he left Germany in, I would say, 32 already. He left Germany. He came back once, but there is a huge interview with Godard and one with Peter Bogdanovich, and he was a little bit ashamed of the movie later on. So I think he had a little distance to the movie. Thea von der Busch died very early, in her 50s or 60s, and so we don't know what she thought about that later on. But I found anti-Semitic things from Thea von der Busch. There's a card to the mother. She was a young actor, good-looking wife from Vienna, and she worked there. And this short postcard, which you find in Frankfurt, and she says, yeah, Vienna is not so beautiful as you may think, and it's so expensive, and 70% of all the people here are Jews. How terrible. So this is not, I would say, politically socialistic. So she was not an international thinking person. She was all the time very nationalistic, all the time. Yeah, so that's what I found. Okay, other questions? Please.
Could you say a little bit more about the film's anti-modernist position?
Yeah, I would say that if you want the skyscraper and this new world of Metropolis, of course, exposes this modernism, but rejects it at the same time. So in Metropolis, you have conditions of workers which are related to capitalism and so on. So I would say that there is no love for this new aesthetics, but on the contrary, it's much more to have Blut und Boden, to have something, a rural society. This is much more the ideal beyond it. And what do we have? Yeah, that's what I think. This is not a statement concerning modernism in the sense of we want to have skyscrapers, but quite the contrary. This is a world without soul, this new form of modernism. And it's rejecting everything. It's rejecting the United States or capitalism. It's rejecting communism, yeah, and these workers' ideas of being not ruled and so on. And it's rejecting also the republic or democracy. So what we haven't seen, always when you see the workers, you have the French, La Marseillaise, yeah? So this is clear, and the idea beyond is to have a proper own German future, which is anti-modernistic, yeah. Please.
Great lecture, thank you very much.
A little louder, please.
So what would, you said that that Metropolis rejects capitalism and communism, but what would its stance towards fascism and Nazism be?
Yeah, of course, I would say, you see, the success of the Nazis in this period is because of this, if you want, unity of bringing together nationalism and socialism. So, but in a way it didn't happen, but this is the promise. And if you want, this book of Müller van den Broek stays a dream. When he speaks about the millennium, at the end of the book has about 250 pages. And when he speaks about this period, what will come and what's future and what is so beautiful and whatever, these are 20 pages, really vague. So he's not given a sort of script how to produce a better world, but this is a dream, a conservative dream of people who didn't like the Republic. Yeah? So they want to have a sort of metaphysical way of thinking the state, and they would like to have, in a way, a position for the German pupils to have a sort of, a future of its own. Probably that was not so clear. Huh? David.
Thanks for illuminating for me what was very, very puzzling when I watched the movie more recently. So I wanted to ask two questions. One you partly answered already, and that is to what degree this movie could be understood as anti-American. It's really an anti-American statement. And then I'd like to ask the other question is, so why do you think it flopped? Why do you think? Because you think that given what you've shown us, there would be a great surge of interest among the German people to explore the themes and almost an affection for the answer that was presented in the movie. And yet it seemed to fall on deaf ears. Nobody went to see it. It just fell apart. Why?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, the level I showed you here is, of course, much too high to be something which is accessible for people. So this is much too educated. And the plot is too sentimental. If you read reviews of the period, everybody says it's kitsch. You can't like that, yeah? And I would agree with that, yeah? And third, it's not possible to construct a sort of line of dramatic over 2 hours and 30 minutes. It's much too much. So it collapsed. Yeah, their wish to combine, to build up such a German film cathedral, yeah, to be a sort of Panzerkreuzer Potemkin, a sort of birth of a nation, yeah, this was too ambitious. And therefore, I think they completely had out of sight the public. Yeah? So if we see the movie today, to say the truth, we mostly one sees clips, and this is very impressive because, of course, it's well done. And you can't imagine what they invented. Everything is new to construct blue screen. Things are really here for the first time. So this was very clever and technical, in a technical way, fantastic. So movies are also a form, and this has been since ever so, a sort of undeclared war. So this, in movies, you pretend to tell a love story, but in reality, you tell something about how to live and not to live, what's an ideal and what's not. And of course, this is an industry. I mean, even today, the United States earns a lot of money with this kind of industry. And imagine how this happens. Also, that all the good directors from Europe come to Hollywood to work there because they want to have this, if you want, center of movie making and so on, because so many money can be done with that. And of course, this has been seen. And there was a question how cinema should be. And I would say there were a lot of films who produced in Hollywood who didn't had a great success in Germany. But in Metropolis especially, it's the identification, America, racial melting pot, first. And we don't want to have that. Second, America, land of capitalism, yeah, without any soul. Only money is important, and we don't want to have that. So these two very strong points, how to have a cliché from the United States. And I would say you would find a lot of text and so on who are looking on the United States in the 20s in this critical way. Okay, another question.
Okay, how was the movie perceived later on in East Germany?
In what?
East Germany.
In East Germany, that's a good question. So I would say, yeah, let me say something because you asked that. In the States, the film was received as being socialistic. Yeah, so Fritz Lang had to answer some questions about that. But in Eastern Germany, this was a classic. And remember what I told you at the beginning, that the film, for most of its time, was not complete. So this, in a way, was always a sort of ruin, yeah, which was not complete, so it was hard to say what was really the intention of the movie. But I know that the film has been shown in the GDR time in Eastern Germany, of course, yeah. So no problem with that. Nobody has seen this political implication. Yeah.
Well, Jürgen, I think we can thank you for your very
Long, wonderful discussion after this. Thank you so much. It's really a great pleasure. Thank you, everybody.